Meanwhile, Feldway was growing impatient. The curse he had placed on Veldora had been unexpectedly destroyed. In contrast, Diablo was grinning from ear to ear. "Oh, is something wrong?" he asked with a smile, not letting up on his relentless pursuit of Feldway. "Shut up." "Why?" Their conversation was going nowhere, which was exactly Diablo's intention. He simply wanted to provoke Feldway. To begin with, there was no reason to obey when told to shut up, nor was there any justification for being complained at. "You. It seems I've seen through you. All your schemes are likely to end in failure, and it looks like this will conclude with our victory." Diablo sneered as he spoke. In reality, he wasn't as compassed as he appeared. Diablo's body was already in tatters, and whether he could defeat Feldway in this state was uncertain. Moreover, the presence of Ivorage couldn't be ignored. Even if things didn't go according to Feldway's plans, declaring their own victory was still a stretch. However, it was true that gaining a psychological advantage could lead to a favorable outcome in battle. Diablo, staying true to the basics, was laying the groundwork to defeat Feldway. This, too, was a technique. Sigh, well, it seems you've truly managed to anger me. Feldway's demeanor changed. Instead of continuing to control Milim, Feldway made a decision. Milim was invincible. If he continued with the current strategy, he would eventually annihilate the enemy and succeed in destroying the world tree. His rationality told him that this was the correct course of action. However, that would mean he couldn't go all out against Diablo. Victory was assured even as things stood. Yet, Feldway couldn't help but want to silence this insolent opponent by showing his full power. If he were to do that, the strategy would undoubtedly succeed. However, Feldway himself would have to take a significant risk. Even if temporarily, his power would greatly diminish, putting him in a highly dangerous state. Even so, he believed defeat was impossible, but as the prideful Feldway, he was fixated on achieving a complete victory. But Diablo changed that mindset. Feldway decided to prioritize the success of the strategy, even if it meant enduring some humiliation. He resolved to abandon his control over Milim, and instead focus on crushing Diablo with his full strength. Milim destroyed the divine tree. Feldway poured his entire will into controlling Milim, and issued the force command. With this, the power of domination lost its influence. However, it didn't matter. Even if Feldway's control over her was lifted, the final command he had given would still be executed. Moreover, since Milim's stampede remained active, he figured he could simply eliminate any obstacles and regain control afterward. There was no stopping it now. Milim would destroy the divine tree. If that happened, the world would end. Feldway felt his defensive power drop drastically and braced himself. However, Diablo merely smirked. "What? This is the perfect opportunity to defeat me, so why isn't he making a move?" As Feldway questioned this, he realized that Diablo's gaze wasn't directed at him. Beyond his line of sight lay. Yuki was being worked to the bone. Hey, isn't this power harassment? Quite. Next, these coordinates. Yeah. His complaints fell on deaf ears. Chloe's demands were one-sided, leaving Yuki no room to interject. Watching this, Veldora nodded happily with a hum. He seemed to feel a sense of familiarity with Yuki, but that only irritated him further. Good grief, why do I have to go through this? Yuki couldn't help but sigh. It was only natural for him to feel this way. After all, Chloe was mercilessly using Yuki. First, it quickly became apparent that Yuki had mastered instant movement. His appearance had been precisely witnessed. Instant movement was a skill that allowed for teleportation without even a moment's delay. Its usefulness went without saying. In combat, it made it possible to evade almost all attacks. However, it came with the condition that it could only be used by beings of a certain level or higher. If one could cover a hemisphere with a radius of about 100 meters using magic perception, they could pre-program a code to detect attacks and activate instant movement, allowing them to evade even attacks at the speed of light. Yuki had cleared this requirement, so it wasn't a problem for him. Even Milim's charges, which could be fatal even if they just grazed him, could be easily dodged after being seen. If Milim had been rational, it wouldn't have been so easy. But that was just a hypothetical. Since Milim was currently in a state where this worked, it should be fully utilized. As a result, the stability of their strategy had significantly improved. By forcing Yuki into the role of the most dangerous decoy, they only needed to ensure that Milim didn't use wide-range attacks. This strategy had another advantage. In fact, this one might be even more important. It was the fact that it prevented Milim from powering up. Veldora, for example, had failed to hold back on several occasions, triggering Milim's ultimate skill, King of Wrath, Satnal. When that happened, Milim's power would multiply, making her stronger and stronger. With Yuki, there was no such worry. Well, I get Chloe's intentions, but doesn't that mean she's looking down on me? Yuki was a genius, so he had already figured out why they were using such a roundabout strategy. That's why he understood that he couldn't pose a threat to Milim, and it secretly depressed him. How pathetic, how pathetic. Shut up already. Yuki grumbled in irritation. The Manas, Maria's annoyance was beyond description. Even things that weren't important were repeated twice, and it was utterly tedious. On top of that, she was absolutely brimming with malice toward Yuki. Given that her personality was a copy of Mirabelle, who had been his sworn enemy, it was no surprise that their compatibility was as bad as it could possibly be. Yet, her performance was top-notch, so whenever Yuki made a mistake, she would pounce on him as if she had caught a criminal. Even when he didn't make mistakes, she would sometimes throw mocking remarks his way, just like now. I really need to figure out how to turn off her voice. Yuki secretly vowed to himself. Still, Yuki thought. This is definitely some kind of ridiculous harassment, but it's absolutely that person's doing, right? He recalled Rimuru, who wasn't here now. Yuki believed that the reason he could return here was thanks to Rimuru. The probability of reuniting with Mai in that place was so close to zero that just thinking about it made him feel faint. That very fact was proof of Rimuru's involvement, and in other words, it was proof that Rimuru was still alive. Yuki was convinced of this. If that was the case, then now was the time to push through. Good grief. The only one who could handle such a fearsome demon lord like Milim is Rimuru, right? If you know that, then get moving. Alright. Okay, I'll do my best to. Veldora, don't do anything unnecessary. Of course. As expected, Chloe took charge. She gave precise instructions, making sure Milim didn't get close to the divine tree. Not only Yuki, but even Veldora seemed unable to defy her. So, what should I do next? To grab Milim's attention, use your proud psychic abilities to launch an attack. Did I ever tell you I could use psychic powers? From Yuki's perspective, the masked hero was practically a stranger. He knew her true identity was Chloe Aubert, a student from the Freedom Academy, but she felt like a completely different person now. He didn't think she knew any of his secrets, but... explanations later. Just do it. Okay. Yuki was completely overwhelmed by Chloe's intensity. Giving up on asking for an explanation, he obediently followed her instructions. And so, some time passed. Chloe let out a small murmur. Yuki instinctively turned his gaze towards Chloe. It seemed to him that there was a tone of joy in her voice. However, Chloe's expression remained cold and detached. Was I mistaken? Yuki thought, and in that very moment, the situation took a sudden turn. A telepathic wave from Feldway reverberated through the area, commanding, Milim, destroy the divine tree. In response, Milim fixed her eyes on the divine tree. This is bad. Yuki moved in a panic. He attempted to attack Milim, but she remained completely unfazed. It was as if she hadn't even noticed the attack, showing no signs of damage, and she didn't even pay attention to Yuki. I can't do this alone. Then leave it to me. Dragon Claw. This time, Veldora launched the attack. However, Milim paid no heed. She continued to focus on the divine tree, preparing to unleash her ultimate technique, Dragon Nova. In proportion to the unprecedented scale of the Dragon Nova that was about to be unleashed, a thin pale blue membrane spread out around Milim, glowing brightly as if to protect her. Veldora, who had charged in to attack, was repelled by this barrier. When Dragon Nova is unleashed, a barrier is deployed to protect the caster. This barrier, which appeared as a pale blue membrane, was actually a cocoon of stellar particles. Unless one was deeply familiar with its nature, penetrating it would be impossible. What an incredibly sturdy barrier. Even my Dragon Claw couldn't make a dent. This is astonishing, considering it's not even a defensive technique. Veldora had no choice but to acknowledge how formidable Milim was. He had been confident in his abilities, so being so easily thwarted was a shock. But giving up here was not an option. There's no other way. I'll have to use my full power to manipulate the probabilities and alter the trajectory of Dragon Nova. The chances of success were practically zero, but Veldora had discerned that with fertile paradox, it might be possible to interfere with the stellar particles. Yuki, assist me. Fine. So, what do you need me to do? Right, you handle the coordinate calculations. Just as Veldora was giving these instructions, he suddenly noticed something strange. Chloe, who had been so annoyingly bossy just moments ago, had now fallen silent. Had she given up? But that didn't seem to be the case. She had somehow positioned herself in front of the divine tree and was glaring at Milim. Does she have some kind of plan? If so, I should join her. If nothing else, she was in the direct line of fire for Dragon Nova. Honestly, it was suicidal, but since both Yuki and him were here, Veldora judged that they could at least survive. Before that, let's regroup with Chloe. Understanding. Yuki, together with Veldora, teleported behind Chloe. From there, they faced Milim head-on. Between Milim's hands, stardust sparkled, swirling with a destructive force unlike anything of this world. It was like a nebula. An overwhelming amount of energy was compressed to an ultra-high density, harboring a danger capable of effortlessly annihilating even star systems. Milim, now devoid of reason, showed no restraint. The power she wielded had already surpassed 100 times what she had unleashed upon Zelanis. Understanding this, Veldora muttered. Indeed. Even I cannot neutralize that. Though quick to give up, everyone thought it was only natural. Anyone who could see it would easily predict that it would unleash destruction on a level never before observed in the cardinal world. With the force that destroyed the God Tree, it wouldn't be surprising if it shattered stars. Feldway laughed heartily. Ha 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 ha. Magnificent. Truly magnificent, Milim. Now, unleash it and fulfill my ambition. Responding to the command, Milim fired Dragon Nova. The world was ending, everyone braced themselves. A pale, glowing stream of light, crackling with electricity, burned through the atmosphere at nearly the speed of light, closing in on the God Tree. In its path stood Chloe, Veldora, and Yuki. The warriors who sought to protect this land looked up at the three of them. No one despaired. Heaven helps those who help themselves, they say, and with a sense of satisfaction that they had done their best until the very end, they experienced the brief moments before the final instant, and then witnessed a miracle. In that moment, space wavered. Someone appeared. Their radiant moon-white hair fluttered, capturing everyone's gaze. Time, which had felt as though it had stopped, began to flow again, but everyone's senses seemed numb. Destruction did not occur. The God Tree was unharmed, and the world had not perished. Only. Ouch. I mean, seriously, that really hurt. The carefree voice rang out. The Dragon Nova, which had held the power to destroy the world, had vanished without a trace. As if she had known this would happen, Chloe moved. Rimuru-sama. Without hesitation, she clung to the most reliable back of all.